Where is the true center of power in the 20th century? If you think of the White House with its Oval Office or Buckingham Palace with its gilded gates, you are looking in the wrong place. Real history was not made in marble corridors or under the vaults of cathedrals. It was born in a creaky wooden house buffeted by all the winds of the Atlantic, where the smell of salt water mingled with the smell of old books and ambitions so vast they frightened even their creator. Imagine the scene. Ordinary white siding, darkened by humidity. Green shutters that flap in the wind. A wide veranda with wicker chairs, the paint on which peeled off 10 years ago. This place looks like the summer cottage of a well-to-do but not overly wealthy doctor. But it was right here, in Hyannisport on Cape Cod, that the most brilliant and most tragic American dynasty was designed. Why did this modest house become the stage for a drama of Shakespearean scale? Why precisely here, on 6 acres of land by Nantucket Sound, was the fate of an entire nation rewritten, only to be brutally crossed out? No one knew that behind the white picket fence lay not just a family nest, but a ruthless factory for producing leaders, where love was the currency and success the only way to survive. The story of this place begins not with triumph, but with humiliation. The year is 1926. Joseph Patrick Kennedy, a man whose fortune already numbered in the millions of dollars, stands before closed doors. He is rich, he is smart, he is damn ambitious. Among his assets are a bank, a shipyard, and a budding career in Hollywood. But to Boston's elite, to those whose ancestors arrived on the Mayflower, he remains merely the grandson of an Irish cooper, an outsider, an upstart. When Joseph applied for membership in the prestigious Cohasset Golf Club, he was refused. This refusal, seemingly a minor social slight, became the very stone that triggered the avalanche. Joseph Kennedy did not knock on a closed door twice. He made a decision that would define his family's psychology for a century to come. If the elite won't let you into their world, you must build your own world that will make their world look pale and insignificant. He needed not just a summer residence. He needed a fortress. He needed sovereign territory where only his laws would apply. In 1928, Joseph and his wife Rose found what they were looking for. It was Malcolm's cottage on the ocean shore in Hyannisport. The deal cost $25,000. For comparison, a worker at Ford's factory in those years earned about $1,500 a year. This was a significant sum, but it paled in no comparison to the Vanderbilt palaces in Newport. And that was the whole point. Joseph Kennedy, a man who could buy any mansion on the coast, chose architectural modesty as a strategic weapon. He hired Boston architect Frank Payne not to build him a Versailles, but to expand the house while preserving its deceptive simplicity. The style they chose is known as shingle siding. This is architecture that doesn't shout about money, it whispers about confidence. But behind this facade hid a paradox. The house that looked like a shelter from storms was designed as a training camp before the main battle. In this house, there was something unsettling from the very beginning. 17 rooms, 9 bathrooms, but not a single corner where one could hide from the all-seeing eye of the patriarch. The windows faced the ocean, but the inhabitants' gaze was always to be directed toward the horizon, beyond the visible. Joseph Kennedy brought his family here not to relax. He brought them here to isolate them from external influences and create a unique ecosystem. Here, on the wind-swept coast, far from the snobbery of Boston salons, he began his great experiment. He wanted to prove that the blood of Irish immigrants could become the blue blood of a new American aristocracy. But when he signed the purchase documents, when he first stepped onto the wide veranda floorboards, he could not know what price this house would exact from his children. It seemed impossible that these bright rooms, filled with sea light, would one day become the setting for funerals, strokes, and despair. It seemed impossible that the lawn in front of the house would become the most famous lawn in the world, trodden by presidents, senators, and killers of hopes. The house in Hyannisport was ready to receive its residents. The stage was set. The actors did not yet know their roles, but the script had already begun to be written, and the first word in it was not glory, but loneliness. To understand the architecture of this house, one must first dissect the architecture of its owner's soul. Joseph Kennedy was a product of East Boston, a place where the Irish accent was a stigma, and the Catholic faith a barrier against which dreams shattered. His philosophy was simple and cruel. The world is not fair, so you must be stronger than the world, smarter than the world, and richer than the world. The purchase of the house in Hyannisport became his manifesto of independence. In 1929, while the rest of America watched in horror as the stock market crashed, plunging the country into the Great Depression, Kennedy expanded his holdings. He hired architect Frank Payne with a clear task. The house must accommodate not just a family, but a clan. The result of this renovation was telling. On the outside, the house remained restrained, almost puritanical, but inside it was transformed into an elite barracks for raising winners. This was a worldview carved in wood and stone. Joseph and his wife Rose, daughter of Boston's legendary mayor Honey Fitz, created a system that tolerated no weakness. Rose Kennedy, whom history often unfairly pushes into the shadow of her loud husband, was the steel core of this mechanism. She kept a card file on each of the 9 children, recording their weight, height, and medical data with the precision of a corporate chief accountant. But the true center of the house, its altar and battlefield, was the dining table. The furniture in the dining room was simple, but what happened behind it resembled a military council meeting. Here they did not discuss the weather, outfits, or neighbor gossip. Joseph demanded reports. What is happening in Europe? Why is Chamberlain wrong? What is the price of the pound sterling? If a child, whether the eldest Joe or the sickly Jack, could not respond argumentatively, they could be sent away from the table. Food was secondary. The main course was intellectual domination. The paradox of this house lay in its social duality. On one hand, the Kennedys desperately mimicked the American aristocracy, those very holders of old money who rejected Joseph at the golf club. They wore the same clothes, engaged in the same sailing, built houses in the same Shaker style. But on the other hand, they despised the relaxed languor of the elite. In the Kennedy house, rest was a form of hard work. If you went swimming, you had to swim for time. If you played touch football on the famous lawn, it was a battle to blood and bruises. Joseph instilled in his sons' minds a dangerous, destructive axiom. Second place is just the first loser. This house knew no pity for outsiders. Every detail of the interior, from the modest, almost ascetic bedrooms to the cold wooden floors, screamed of discipline. They were building not just a summer residence, they were building an isolated republic from which they intended to storm Washington. And the fuel for this machine was the children's ambitions mixed with the fear of disappointing their father, who watched them from the veranda like the captain of a ship heading straight for an iceberg. But for ultimate triumph, mere brute force and Irish stubbornness were not enough. Joseph's strategy lacked the shine, that elusive patina of true aristocracy which cannot be bought with money, but can be acquired through marriage. In 1953, Jacqueline Bouvier enters the story. If the Kennedys were a storm, she was an exquisite calm. Her appearance in Hyannisport became not just an introduction to the daughter-in-law, but a merging of 2 civilizations. Jackie, raised in the silence of Newport and Hampton's estates, was shocked by the Kennedy chaos. She called them gorillas who shouted louder at breakfast than the seagulls outside the window. But old Joe, that cunning fox, instantly understood that before him was the missing piece of the puzzle. Jacqueline was that very old America whose doors had been closed to him in 1926. This union transformed the very physical structure of the estate. In 1956, Jack and Jackie buy the neighboring house at 111 Irving Avenue. From that moment, Hyannis Port ceases to be just one man's house and turns into a real clan, a closed village within a village. This was the birth of the legendary compound. Now there stood two houses symbolizing two generations. If Joe's house was the fortress of the patriarchy, then Jack and Jackie's house became the showcase of a new era. Jackie brought to the Kennedys' austere aesthetic a sophistication that had never been there. She hated her mother-in-law's old, sagging furniture, but possessing impeccable taste did not throw everything out. She began a subtle game, mixing French chic with maritime brutality. It was at this moment that the estate acquires its cult visual language, not just a rich house, but a place where elitism looks natural, like sand on the beach. Jack and Jackie's marriage turned the private residence into a stage for national mythology. The walls began to absorb not only salt, but also camera flashes, for now behind the white fence lived not just a family, but the future king and queen of Camelot. Welcome inside the big house, the heart of this empire. If you had entered here in 1960, your first impression would have been deceptive. You expected to see gold, marble, and heavy velvet befitting a family with a fortune in hundreds of millions of dollars. Instead, you are greeted by the smell of floor wax mixed with damp, salty air and the creak of old floorboards. Here, in the 21 rooms of the main mansion, the most complex psychological drama was played out. The house did not overwhelm the guest with luxury. It overwhelmed him with history. Rose Kennedy, the mistress of this world, created an aesthetic that would later be called preppy style or worn chic, but at the time it was simply a philosophy of confidence. The furniture was upholstered in simple chintz with a floral pattern. Wicker chairs creaked, and there was no room on the walls for expensive canvases by old masters because every square inch was occupied by something more valuable to the owners: their own images. The walls of the corridors and living rooms whispered not of the Renaissance culture, but of the family cult. Hundreds, thousands of photographs in simple wooden frames covered table surfaces, mantelpieces, and walls along the staircases. This was a temple erected to itself. Here were captured victories in sailing regattas, handshakes with the Pope, Harvard diplomas. Psychologically, it worked flawlessly. Anyone who entered this house instantly understood that they were not just visiting, but inside a closed club of the elect. The strangest and most telling decorative element was the corridor lined with glass cabinets of dolls. Rose collected them from all over the world, and these porcelain eyes watching the passers-by created an eerie sensation of silent observers' presence. This was a collection of trophies from travels, a reminder that the world was just a toy store for people with their capabilities. But the house's true duality was hidden in its vertical structure. If the first floor with its sunny veranda and white furniture was the face of Puritan morality and openness, the basement held the secret of the origin of their success. Down there, Joseph Kennedy equipped a professional movie theater, the first private cinema in all of New England. This was a tribute to his past in Hollywood, but also a powerful metaphor. Walls upholstered in red velvet, a professional projector, soft chairs. Here the family learned to understand the power of image. While upstairs the children crammed history, downstairs they learned how to look on screen. It was in this basement that the understanding formed that politics is a continuation of show business. The contrast was striking. Upstairs, austerity and discipline. Downstairs, the magic of light and illusion. Mission Control was the dining room, but the true throne was on the wide veranda wrapping around the house. There stood Joseph's favorite chair. From there opened a view of the famous lawn descending to the ocean. This lawn was not just grass, it was a proving ground. Joseph could sit there for hours, observing how his children played touch football. His gaze was a radar. He assessed not agility, but character. Who gave up? Who cheated? Who took on leadership? The house's architecture was designed to be a panopticon, a place where everything is visible, no privacy. 9 bathrooms for a huge family and constant guests created eternal queues and bustle, forcing the residents to be constantly in view, constantly on edge, constantly in social interaction. By November 1960, the house had transformed completely. The living room turned into a communications headquarters. Long telephone cables snaked across Persian rugs that remembered the steps of little Jack. In the room called the sunroom, maps of states were hung. The house, which was built as a refuge from the world, now absorbed the world. 12 bedrooms were crammed with advisors, strategists, and family members. The air was electrified with cigarette smoke and anticipation. It was right here, in these walls paneled with white wood, that the old dream of the Irish outcast became reality. But the grandeur of this moment already carried the seeds of future silence. The house was overflowing with life, buzzing like a beehive, but it was designed for triumph, not for consolation. And when the fanfares fall silent, these 21 rooms will become too spacious for those who remain alive. But every greatness has its price, and the bill for Joseph Kennedy's ambitions was presented to the House with frightening speed. If the first half of the 20th century was the story of ascent, the 1960s turned this snow-white mansion into a setting for an ancient Greek tragedy. The turning point came not in Dallas, but right here, on this veranda, on December 19, 1961. Joseph Kennedy, the architect of the dynasty, the ambassador, the man whose voice made senators tremble, suffered a massive stroke. In one instant, the tyrant and creator found himself locked in his own body. This was the cruel irony of fate. The man who built this house as a loudspeaker for his will lost the ability to speak. Now he sat in his favorite wicker chair, wrapped in a blanket, and looked at the ocean. His gaze was clear, but his lips were mute. The house, accustomed to his roar, plunged into an anxious silence. This personal tragedy of the patriarch exposed the deep moral conflict embedded in the estate's foundation. Joseph demanded victory at any cost from his children, but now he was a living monument to the fragility of human strength. The family continued to function around him. Rose Kennedy, demonstrating frightening stoicism, continued to dress for dinner and engage in small talk, as if her husband had simply grown tired, not turned into an invalid. This scene, a paralyzed father at the head of the table and the family playing at normality, became a symbol of the Kennedys' moral ambivalence. They knew how to maintain the facade, even when the building was crumbling from within. Was it heroism or a form of deep denial? The viewer can only guess what old Joe was thinking, looking at his golden children, knowing that he could no longer protect them with his money and connections. And then came November 1963. The assassination of John Kennedy split the house's history in two. Hyannis Port, which just 3 years earlier had been the president's summer residence, the headquarters of the summer White House, instantly turned into a fortress of grief. It was here, not in Washington or New York, that Jacqueline Kennedy returned. And here we see the second key character in a completely different light. Jackie, who previously seemed like an alien element, a fragile vase among steel hammers, became the steel core in the moment of catastrophe. She wandered through the rooms of the house on Irving Avenue, dressed in black, against the backdrop of the same ocean that remembered their happy days. Her presence in the house changed its meaning. Before it was a place of power, now it became a place of memory. Jackie faced a horrifying dilemma: preserve the myth of Camelot, which she herself helped create, or let reality destroy the family's image. She chose the myth. In these walls, where every item reminded of Jack, his books, his collection of whale teeth, scrimshaw, his rocking chair, she decided to cement the legend. She hid from the world his illnesses, his affairs, his weaknesses. leaving only the image of a hero. But the most terrible thing was happening in the big house. Old Joe was not told about his son's death right away. Rose forbade turning on the TV and radio in his room, fearing that the news would kill him. Imagine this atmosphere, the house full of Secret Service agents, weeping relatives and ringing phones. But in the patriarch's room, a play of absolute calm is enacted. This was the moment of truth for the Kennedy philosophy. Reality is too terrible, so we will create our own. In the end, when Joe learned the truth, he could not scream. According to the nurse's accounts, he simply closed his eyes and tears streamed down his paralyzed face. The house, built to defy God, had lost. The walls that were supposed to protect from the outside world could not protect from a bullet. The idol with the white picket fence, which had aroused the envy of all America, suddenly looked like a golden cage inside which people thrashed about who had everything except a future. From that moment, Hyannisport ceased to be a dream factory. It became a mausoleum where the living were forced to coexist with the ghosts of their unfulfilled hopes. The nightmare returned in June 1968. The assassination of Robert Kennedy finally tore the veil of invulnerability from Hyannisport. The house, conceived by Joseph as a springboard for presidents, turned into a bunker for orphans. The old patriarch, still locked in his paralysis, watched his plan crumble, but the real collapse happened a year later. The Chappaquiddick Bridge incident involving Ted Kennedy destroyed the remnants of the family's moral superiority. The dream of returning to the White House drowned in the dark water, along with the senator's car. It seemed like the end, but it was precisely at this point of absolute crisis that an amazing transformation occurred. Ted Kennedy, the baby of the family, returned to the big house not to hide, but to take on a new burden. He rethought the very purpose of the inheritance. Instead of chasing supreme power, he chose the path of preservation. Remaining a surrogate father to 13 nephews and nieces, he turned the cold success factory into a hospital for souls. The famous lawn was no longer an arena of brutal competition. It became a place where they taught survival. Ted transformed his father's selfish ambition into public service, becoming the Lion of the Senate. The house ceased to be a fortress of conquerors and became a beacon of resilience, proving that greatness is not the absence of falls, but the ability to rise when the whole world expects your end. Today, the main house has been transferred to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute. The silence of museum halls has replaced the noise of fierce family arguments. But Hyannisport remains something immeasurably greater than just elite real estate. It is America's answer to ancient myths, frozen in white wood. The story of this estate transforms into a universal lesson. Ambitions can erect walls, but only devotion can hold the roof when the real storm comes. We watch these images now, not with the envy of the 1960s viewers, but with a deep, almost painful understanding. This is a story not about wealth, but about fragility. Like that very green light of the Great Gatsby, the Kennedy estate became a symbol of a dazzling but unattainable dream. But unlike Fitzgerald's hero, this clan survived, managing to transmute their personal tragedy into historical legacy. In the end, the Kennedy aesthetic is not just yachts, coarsely knitted sweaters, and tanned smiles. It is the art of keeping your back straight when your world is falling apart. The house still stands on the wind-swept cape. The ocean still beats against the shore, absolutely indifferent to human greatness and grief. And in this constancy lies the final meaning. Empires fall, people depart, but the legend of the courage to live against all odds remains eternal.